He ended our wedding in public to break me, but didn't expect me to turn his world upside down. We're done. I don't want to marry you. Derek said it loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. The Sunday brunch crowd at the Copper Kettle in Seattle went completely silent. I could feel 40 pairs of eyes turning toward our booth by the panoramic windows, the one he'd specifically requested when making the reservation. I sat there, frozen, my fork hovering over my eggs Benedict. The words hung in the air like the aftermath of a bomb going off. His buddies at the table next to ours, the ones he'd insisted join us for what he called a casual Sunday meal, were watching with barely hidden grins on their faces. My name is Claire, and I'm 28 years old. At that moment, sitting across from the man I'd spent 5 years of my life with, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a breaking apart. It was more like a door unlocking that I hadn't known was there. I set my fork down carefully. Derek was staring at me with an expression I'd seen before but never truly understood until right then, a mixture of anticipation and cruelty, like someone who'd set a trap and was waiting to see it spring. "Thank you for telling me," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. His eyebrows shot up. That wasn't the reaction he'd expected. I reached down and slowly removed the engagement ring from my left hand, the one he'd proposed with at his company's holiday gala 2 years ago, making sure everyone in the ballroom was watching. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. "You know what?" I continued, feeling this strange sense of clarity wash over me. "I think I'm going to throw myself a freedom party." One of his friends snorted, and then the whole table erupted in laughter. Derek's smirk deepened. He was enjoying this. I realized in that moment that he'd planned every detail, chosen this public setting, invited these witnesses, orchestrated this whole scene so he could watch me fall apart in front of everyone. But I didn't fall apart. "A freedom party," I repeated, this time looking directly at him. "Yes, I think that's exactly what this situation calls for." The laughter from his friends' table died down when they noticed I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't giving them the show Derek had clearly promised them. Instead, I was reaching for my coffee and taking a long, deliberate sip. "Claire," Derek said, and there was an edge to his voice now. "Did you hear what I just said?" "I heard you perfectly," I replied, setting down my cup. "You don't want to marry me. You're ending our engagement. I believe I already thanked you for being honest." His jaw clenched. This wasn't going according to his plan. I pulled my wallet from my purse and placed enough cash on the table to cover my meal, plus a generous tip for our server who was probably going to have quite a story to tell her co-workers later. "I have to say, Derek, you really picked quite the setting for this announcement," I said, standing up and gathering my things. "A packed restaurant on a Sunday morning. Your friends conveniently positioned at the next table. Very theatrical." His face flushed slightly. "I thought you deserved to know the truth." "And now I do," I said simply. "More truth than you probably intended to give me." I looked at his friends, Cameron, Bryce, and Scott, who were exchanging uncomfortable glances now. The amusement had drained from their faces, replaced by confusion. "Gentlemen," I said, nodding toward them. "Thank you for being here today. Your presence has been very enlightening." As I walked toward the exit, I could feel the weight of every stare in that restaurant. But instead of shame or humiliation, I felt something else entirely. Freedom. 5 years. I'd given Derek 5 years of my life. And in one carefully orchestrated moment, he'd shown me exactly who he really was. Not accidentally, not in a moment of weakness, but deliberately. He'd planned this public execution of our relationship like someone planning a surprise party. The cool Seattle air hit my face as I stepped outside, and I took a deep breath. My hands weren't shaking. My eyes were dry. I walked to my Honda Civic in the parking lot with steady steps, unlocked the door, and slid behind the wheel. Only then, in the privacy of my own car, did I allow myself to fully process what had just happened. But it wasn't devastation that washed over me. It was recognition. I had just watched Derek reveal his true self, and the person he revealed was someone I absolutely did not want to spend my life with. The realization was almost liberating. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Amber. "How's brunch going?" I stared at the message for a moment before typing back, "Wedding's off." Derek ended it. "We'll explain later. But honestly, I think I'm going to be okay." Her response came immediately, "What?" "I'm coming over. Now." I put the phone down and started the car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back at the copper kettle one more time. Through the window, I could see Derek still at our booth, his friends gathered around him. He was probably telling them I was in shock, that the reality hadn't hit me yet, that I'd come crawling back once I processed everything. He had no idea what was actually happening. He just handed me the key to a cage I hadn't even realized I'd been living in. The drive home gave me time to think, and what I thought about were all the moments I'd chosen to ignore over the past 5 years. I'd met Derek when I was 23, fresh out of college and working my first real job as a junior graphic designer at a marketing agency in downtown Seattle. He was 26 then, a sales manager at a tech startup. Confident and charismatic in that way that made you feel special when he focused his attention on you. Our first date was at a trendy wine bar near Pike Place Market. He'd listened intently as I talked about my dream of eventually becoming a freelance designer and maybe starting my own creative studio someday. He'd nodded in all the right places, asked all the right questions. Looking back now, I realized he'd been taking notes rather than actually connecting with me. By the end of our first year together, I'd started reshaping my life around his preferences. He didn't like my college friends, said they were immature, so I saw them less and less. He thought my apartment in Capitol Hill was too far from his office in Bellevue, so I moved to a place in Redmond to be closer to him. He said my dream of going freelance was financially irresponsible and I should focus on climbing the corporate ladder. So I shelved my plans and stayed at the agency. I told myself these were compromises. That's what relationships were about, right? Give and take. But the giving had been almost entirely one-sided. When I defended Derek to my friends and family, I found myself using phrases I'd heard other women use about partners who didn't deserve them. He's just stressed about work. He didn't mean it that way. You don't know him like I do. My mom had pulled me aside at Thanksgiving last year, concern written all over her face. Honey, does Derek make you happy? Truly happy? I'd brushed off her question with a practiced smile. Of course, Mom. We're getting married, aren't we? But happy wasn't the word I would have used if I'd been honest with myself. Comfortable, maybe. Established. Invested. I'd put so much of myself into this relationship that the idea of it not working out felt like admitting to 5 years of failure. The engagement had happened about 2 years into our relationship. Derek had proposed at his company's annual gala, getting down on one knee in front of 300 people, employees, clients, executives. I'd said yes with all those eyes on me, phones recording the moment. What else could I say? That's when I should have seen the pattern. Derek loved an audience. He loved being the center of attention, loved moments that made him look good in front of others. The proposal wasn't really about us. It was about the performance. The wedding planning had been another series of one-sided compromises. I wanted a small ceremony with close family and friends, maybe at a vineyard in Woodinville. Derek wanted a massive event with 400 guests at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, most of whom I'd never met. People from his company, his clients, his networking contacts. Every time I pushed back, he had a way of making me feel selfish. This isn't just about you, Claire. This is about our future. These people are important for our careers. Our careers. He meant his career. My job as a graphic designer didn't require impressing tech executives and venture capitalists. But I'd given in, again and again, because somewhere along the way I'd stopped trusting my own judgment. Derek had a talent for making his preferences seem like logical necessities while making my desires seem like emotional indulgences. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car for a few more minutes, thinking about all the subtle ways he'd enjoyed having power over me. There was the time he'd corrected my pronunciation of bruschetta at a dinner party with his co-workers, making it seem like a joke but ensuring everyone knew I'd made a mistake. There was the way he'd compliment me in public. Doesn't Claire look nice tonight? But criticize me in private. My clothes were too casual. My hair needed to be styled differently. The stories I told at parties went on too long. There were the plans he'd make without consulting me, then act wounded if I expressed any frustration. And there was the money. Derek made significantly more than I did, and he never let me forget it. He paid for expensive dinners and weekend getaways to Vancouver or Portland, but those gestures came with invisible strings attached. When I tried to contribute or suggest more affordable options, he'd shake his head with this patronizing smile. Let me handle it. You don't need to worry about finances. What he meant was, I control this. You don't get a say. I'd been so focused on making the relationship work that I hadn't noticed how small I'd become within it. The woman who'd once dreamed of starting her own creative studio now asked permission to meet friends for coffee. The woman who'd once had strong opinions about everything now deferred to Derek's judgment on nearly every decision. Sitting in my car, I felt the weight of those 5 years differently than I had an hour ago. This wasn't the end of a love story. This was an escape route I hadn't known I needed. My phone buzzed again. Derek. That wasn't the reaction I expected. We need to talk. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I didn't respond. That evening, Amber arrived at my apartment with 2 bottles of wine and a bag of Thai takeout from our favorite place on Broadway. "Tell me everything," she said, kicking off her shoes and settling onto my couch. "And I mean everything. Don't leave out a single detail." So I told her. About the restaurant, the announcement, his friends watching like it was entertainment, about how he'd specifically requested that booth by the windows, how he'd insisted his buddies join us for brunch. Amber's expression shifted from shock to understanding to something that looked almost like anger. "I knew it," she said quietly. "I knew something was wrong with that guy." "You did?" "Claire, I've been your best friend since sophomore year of college. I watched you change over the past 5 years. The woman who used to stay up all night working on design projects and talking about starting her own business started asking permission to grab lunch with me. Do you know how many times I wanted to say something?" I felt heat rise to my face. "Why didn't you?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it," she said gently. "And because I knew if I pushed too hard, he'd use that to isolate you even more. I was waiting for you to see it yourself." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. She'd been watching, waiting, protecting our friendship by not forcing a confrontation I would have defended him against. "The thing that bothers me most," I said slowly, "is that he planned it. This wasn't spontaneous. He chose a public setting. He invited witnesses. He wanted to humiliate me in front of people." Amber nodded, her jaw tight. "He wanted to break you. He wanted everyone to see you fall apart so he could look like the one in control." "But I didn't fall apart." "No," she said with a small smile. "You didn't. And I bet that's driving him absolutely insane right now." As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Derek. "I think you're in shock. This isn't like you. Call me when you're ready to have an actual conversation." "What does he want?" Amber asked. "He thinks I'm in shock. He's confused that I'm not begging him to reconsider." Amber laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Of course he is. Guys like Derek expect a certain reaction. They expect tears, begging, bargaining. When they don't get it, they don't know what to do." I set my phone face down on the coffee table. His friends were laughing at first. When I took off the ring and said I was going to throw a freedom party, they thought it was hilarious, like I was some delusional woman who didn't understand what was happening. What made them stop laughing? I thought about it. When I didn't break down. When I thanked him for being honest and walked out with my head up, they didn't know how to react. Amber poured us each a glass of wine. "So this freedom party, are you actually going to do it?" The idea had come to me spontaneously in the restaurant, a deflection born from some instinct I didn't fully understand at the time. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. "You know what? I think I am," I said. "But not for the reasons he probably thinks. Not to get back at him or cause drama. I want to take control of the story before he can rewrite it." "What do you mean?" "Derek's going to tell people his version of what happened. He's going to paint himself as the guy who had to end things with a woman who wasn't right for him. He's going to make me look desperate or unstable or both. But if I throw a party celebrating my freedom, if I frame this as a good thing that happened rather than something that was done to me, I take that power away from him." Amber's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. You're not the heartbroken fiancée crying into her pillow. You're the woman who dodged a bullet and is celebrating her independence." "Exactly." We talked for hours that night, and with each passing hour, more pieces fell into place. Amber helped me see things I'd been too close to notice. The way Derek's compliments always had conditions attached. The way his acts of generosity came with expectations of gratitude. The way he'd systematically separated me from people who might have challenged his influence. "There's something else," I said as the evening grew late. "Something about the way his friends were positioned at that restaurant." Scott had his phone out. I saw it when I stood up to leave. Amber's expression hardened. He wanted video. He wanted footage of you breaking down. The realization hit me like cold water. This wasn't just a public breakup. This was a production. Derek had wanted documentation of my humiliation, something he could share, something that would cement whatever narrative he was trying to create. That's why he looked so confused when I didn't cry, I said. He was expecting a specific reaction, something that would make good content. Content for what? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew there was more to uncover. Derek had planned this too carefully for it to be just about ending our relationship. I need to find out why, I said quietly. Not to change what happened, but so I understand what I was really dealing with. Amber squeezed my hand. Whatever you find, I'm here. And for what it's worth? I'm proud of you. The woman I saw today, that's the woman I've been waiting to see for 5 years. I looked at her, this friend who'd stood by me even when I hadn't been able to stand up for myself, and I felt something that might have been hope. Tomorrow, I would start digging. Tonight, I would rest. The next few days brought a flood of messages from Derek, each one more agitated than the last. Monday morning, Claire, this silent treatment is childish. Call me. Monday evening, I didn't do this to hurt you. We need to talk like adults. Tuesday, people are asking me what happened. You need to help me explain this the right way. Wednesday, I heard you're telling people you're throwing some kind of party. What's that about? Are you trying to embarrass me? I didn't respond to any of them. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't arranging my actions around Derek's comfort or expectations. The silence felt powerful in a way I hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, I began the practical work of untangling our shared life. The wedding had been scheduled for next May, 7 months away. We had deposits on everything: the Fairmorn Olympic Ballroom, a catering company, a photographer, a florist. All under my name because Derek had insisted it made the paperwork simpler, though I now suspected it was because he didn't want his name attached if things went wrong. I called the venue first. The events coordinator, a woman named Patricia who I'd worked with on a few agency projects, was sympathetic when I explained the situation. The deposit is non-refundable, she said apologetically. But under the circumstances, I can offer you a credit toward any future event you might want to host. Actually, I said, an idea forming, I might want to use that space sooner than expected. Would next month work? Patricia sounded surprised but intrigued. What kind of event are you planning? A celebration, I said, of new beginnings. The caterer was similarly understanding. The photographer offered to refund half the deposit as a gesture of goodwill. The florist, a woman named Rosa who'd become friendly over months of planning, said she'd happily provide arrangements for whatever I was planning next, no charge for labor. Each conversation reinforced something I'd begun to realize. The people I'd been working with had seen something I'd missed. When I told them the wedding was cancelled because my fiancé had ended things publicly, more than one responded with variations of, "I'm sorry to hear that, but honestly, I wondered if you were really happy." What do you mean? I asked Rosa, whose shop was in Fremont and who'd been helping me source sustainable, locally grown flowers. Claire, every time you came in, you seemed stressed and apologetic. You kept changing things because he wanted different arrangements or different colors or different quantities. Most brides make changes, but you seemed like you were trying to please someone who couldn't be pleased. That's not how wedding planning should feel. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. By Thursday, I had a clearer picture of what the next few weeks would look like. The Freedom Party would happen at the same venue where our wedding reception was supposed to be, using the deposit that was already paid. The date would be 3 weeks from Saturday, enough time to plan properly, but soon enough that people would still be talking. I started making a guest list, and that's when things got interesting. Derek and I had planned the wedding together, which meant I had access to all our shared documents, including the master guest list. As I scrolled through the names on my laptop, I noticed something that made me stop. There was a separate list I hadn't created and had never seen before. It was titled Priority Alerts and contained about 50 names. Derek's friends, his colleagues, some family members I barely knew. Next to each name was a note: wedding update, send immediately. I clicked on the document history and felt my stomach drop. Derek had created this list 3 weeks before that Sunday brunch. 3 weeks before he ended things. He'd been planning his announcement for almost a month. The separate list suggested he'd prepared a specific message for these people, something he wanted them to receive immediately after the breakup. I dug deeper into our shared files and found a draft of the message he'd planned to send. As some of you witnessed today, I made the difficult decision to end my engagement to Claire. This wasn't easy, but I realized I couldn't commit to a future with someone whose values and life goals weren't aligned with mine. I appreciate your support during this time and hope you'll respect my privacy as I move forward. The message painted him as thoughtful and mature. It made me sound like the problem, someone with misaligned values and goals. It was spin, carefully crafted to control the narrative. But there was more. In his sent folder, I found messages to his friends from that Sunday morning, before we'd even arrived at the restaurant. Today's the day. Meeting at the Copper Kettle at 11. I want you there to see this. It's going to be good. And Scott's response, finally. Been waiting for this. I'll get it on video. They'd planned it together. His buddies weren't innocent bystanders who happened to be there. They were accomplices in a deliberate public humiliation. My hands were shaking as I kept reading. Another message, this one to someone named Vanessa, sent the night before, tomorrow I'm ending things with Claire. I know you've been patient. I can't wait to be free and start our future together. Vanessa. I didn't know anyone named Vanessa, but apparently Derek did. Apparently he knew her well enough to be discussing a future together while he was still engaged to me. I sat back from my laptop, absorbing what I'd discovered. This wasn't just a breakup he'd planned. This was a coordinated operation. He'd had a replacement ready, an audience assembled, a narrative prepared, and a desire for documented proof of my breakdown. The only thing he hadn't planned for was me refusing to break down. My phone buzzed with yet another message from Derek. I don't understand why you're ignoring me. This isn't healthy. For the first time since Sunday, I typed a response. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just no longer interested in conversations that serve your needs at my expense. I think we're done communicating. His reply came almost instantly. That's cold. I expected better from you. I turned off my phone and went back to the documents I'd found. The more I investigated, the clearer the picture became. Derek hadn't been planning his exit for weeks. He'd been planning it for months. Through our shared cell phone account, another thing he'd insisted on for convenience, I could see call logs. Derek and Vanessa had been communicating since early summer, 6 months before his public announcement. The calls started short and infrequent, then grew longer and more regular. I didn't have access to the content of their messages, but the pattern was clear enough. Derek had been cultivating a new relationship while still engaged to me, and the public breakup wasn't an ending, it was a transition. But what I still didn't understand was why he'd chosen such a public setting. If he wanted to leave me for someone else, he could have done it privately. The answer came from an unexpected source. Amber called me Friday evening, her voice tight with controlled anger. I just heard something you need to know. One of my co-workers is dating Cameron's roommate, and apparently there's been a lot of talk in their friend group about what happened Sunday. What are they saying? According to this guy, Derek's been telling his friends for months that you're emotionally unstable. He claimed you were controlling, that you had fits when you didn't get your way, that he was concerned about how you'd react if you tried to end things privately. I felt the air leave my lungs. That's not true. None of that's true. I know, Amber said firmly. But that's the story he's been building. The public breakup wasn't just for show, it was designed to create witnesses. He wanted people to see you react so he could point to it as proof of your instability. But I didn't react the way he expected. Exactly. And that's why he's panicking now. His whole plan depended on you having a meltdown in front of everyone. When you didn't, his story stopped making sense. I remembered Scott with his phone out, filming the whole encounter. He wanted video proof. Video proof that he was right to leave you. Video proof that you were exactly as unstable as he'd been describing. Instead, he's got footage of you calmly thanking him and walking away with your dignity intact. The manipulation was more elaborate than I'd imagined. Derek hadn't just planned a breakup, he'd constructed an entire false narrative designed to make him look like a hero escaping a difficult situation. Every element had been calculated, the public setting, the witnesses, the recording, the pre-written messages to his network. And I'd accidentally destroyed the whole thing by not playing my assigned role. There's more, Amber continued. Cameron's roommate said Derek's been scrambling all week. He's calling people trying to explain why you didn't react the way he said you would. He's telling them you're in shock, that the breakdown is coming, that people just need to wait. He needs me to fall apart. He needs you to prove him right. Right now, you're making him look like a liar. After I hung up with Amber, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and thought about all the times over the past 5 years when Derek had told me what other people supposedly thought of me. My friends think you're too serious. My mom thinks you're not ambitious enough. My colleague said you seemed standoffish at that networking event. I'd internalized those comments, adjusted my behavior, tried to fix problems that might not have even existed. It had never occurred to me that Derek might have been the one creating those perceptions, poisoning opinions, building a case against me piece by piece. The scope of his deception was staggering. But here was the thing Derek hadn't counted on: I still had access to everything. Our shared documents, our shared accounts, our shared history of communication. In his arrogance, he'd never thought to lock me out. He'd assumed I'd be too devastated to think practically, too consumed by grief to examine the evidence he'd left behind. He'd underestimated me. Maybe he'd been underestimating me for 5 years. I pulled out my laptop and began organizing everything I'd found. The timeline of his affair, the messages to his friends planning the public breakup, the draft announcement designed to control the narrative, the phone records showing months of communication with Vanessa. I wasn't going to expose all of this publicly. That would make me look vindictive and give him ammunition to continue his narrative of instability. Instead, I was going to do something more subtle and more powerful. I was going to let the truth speak for itself. The Freedom Party wasn't going to be about Derek at all. It was going to be about me, my independence, my future, my right to define my own story. But if certain pieces of information happened to come to light in the process, well, that was just the truth finding its way into the open. I started drafting the invitation. It wouldn't mention Derek by name. It wouldn't reference the breakup directly. It would simply invite people to celebrate a new chapter in my life, to mark the closing of one door and the opening of another. The guest list would include my real friends, my family, colleagues from work, but it would also include some of the people Derek had been cultivating as witnesses to my supposed breakdown. Let them see me thriving. Let them compare the woman he described with the woman standing in front of them. And if any of them asked what happened, I would tell them the truth. Not an exaggerated version, not a vengeful rant, just the simple, documented facts of what Derek had been planning and why. The truth, I realized, was my most powerful weapon. I didn't need to embellish or dramatize. Derek had done all the damage himself. I just needed to let people see it clearly. The invitations went out on a Tuesday, and by Thursday my phone was ringing constantly. People who'd been at that Sunday brunch were reaching out to mutual friends, trying to understand what was happening. The invitation itself was simple, just a celebration of new beginnings, but combined with the rumors circulating, it raised questions. Scott's girlfriend texted a mutual friend who texted Amber, wanting to know what exactly I was planning. Bryce's wife called someone I worked with, fishing for information about my state of mind. Even people I barely knew were suddenly interested in attending, curious to witness whatever was going to happen. Derek, meanwhile, was in full panic mode. I heard through multiple sources that he'd been calling people all week, trying to get ahead of whatever story he thought I was going to tell. He was framing the party as evidence of my instability. Who throws a celebration 3 weeks after being publicly dumped? He insisted I was having some kind of breakdown, that this was a cry for attention, that people shouldn't encourage my behavior by attending. But his warnings had the opposite effect. Every person he called became more curious about what was actually happening. And when they compared his frantic explanations with the calm, composed woman who'd walked out of that restaurant, something didn't add up. The day before the party, I got a call from someone unexpected, Derek's younger sister, Taylor. "Claire," she said hesitantly, "I heard about what happened. I heard about this party. I wanted to check in with you." Taylor and I had never been particularly close. Derek had kept me at a distance from his family, I now realized, but she'd always been kind during our interactions. "I appreciate you reaching out," I said carefully. Collapsed under the weight of evidence and witness re-evaluation. Scott, who'd recorded the whole breakup, was apparently being confronted by his girlfriend about why he'd participated. Cameron had stopped responding to Derek's messages entirely. The social circle that had gathered to witness my humiliation was now distancing itself from the man who'd orchestrated it. And then, around 10 o'clock, Derek himself showed up. I saw him before he saw me, standing at the entrance of the ballroom, scanning the crowd with barely contained fury. The room didn't exactly go silent, but the energy shifted. Conversations lowered. Eyes tracked his movement as he made his way toward me. "Claire." His voice was tight. What do you think you're doing? I turned to face him fully, keeping my expression neutral. I'm hosting a party, Derek. You're not invited. You're trying to destroy me, he hissed. You're telling people lies, showing them fake evidence. I haven't told anyone anything that isn't true, I said calmly. And everything I've shown people came from our shared documents. Documents you created. His face went pale, then red. You went through my files. Our files, I corrected. The same ones I've always had access to. The same ones you never thought to secure because you assumed I'd be too devastated to think practically. Around us, people had stopped pretending they weren't listening. Jennifer was watching with wide eyes. Emma had her phone in her hand, clearly recording. This is insane, Derek said, his voice rising. You're insane. This is exactly what I told everyone. You're unstable, you're vindictive. Derek, I held up my hand. Look around this room. Look at the faces of people who know me, who knew me before I met you. Do I look unstable to you? Do I look vindictive? He looked. What he saw was a room full of people watching him with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. You planned my public humiliation, I continued, keeping my voice steady. You had your friends film it. You had messages ready to send before brunch even started. You were having an affair with someone named Vanessa while you were still engaged to me. All of this is documented. All of this is true. You don't get to rewrite this story. You don't understand, he started, but the words had no conviction behind them. I understand perfectly, I said. You wanted me to break down so you could point to it as justification for leaving. When I didn't cooperate with your narrative, you lost control of the story. And now you're here, uninvited, proving to everyone in this room exactly who you really are. The silence that followed was devastating. Derek looked around at the faces of people he'd tried to manipulate, people who were now seeing through the careful facade he'd constructed. Then he turned and walked out. The party continued after Derek left, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. There was a collective sense of exhale, like everyone had witnessed something significant and was processing it together. People kept approaching me throughout the rest of the evening. Some to apologize for believing Derek's stories, others to express admiration for how I'd handled the confrontation. I accepted their words graciously, but what I felt most wasn't triumph or vindication. It was peace. The band I'd hired started playing, and the dance floor filled with people I loved. My mom was dancing with my uncle. Amber was teaching Emma some ridiculous move from our college days. Colleagues from work were mingling with cousins I hadn't seen in years. This was what my life could look like going forward. Not smaller, not diminished, not arranged around someone else's expectations. Expansive. Connected. Real. The party wound down around midnight. As the last guests were leaving, Emma pulled me into a long hug. I knew you'd find your way back, she said. I just didn't know it would happen like this. Neither did I admitted. But I'm grateful it did. Over the following weeks, the fallout continued to ripple through Derek's life. His carefully curated professional image took significant damage as the truth spread through networks of mutual acquaintances. Vanessa, the woman he'd been having an affair with, apparently ended things after learning the full extent of how he treated me. Scott and Cameron quietly distanced themselves. Jennifer filed for divorce 3 months later, citing the incident as a catalyst for re-evaluating her own relationship. As for Derek himself, I heard through various sources that he struggled to rebuild his social standing. The persona he'd constructed, successful, principled, the victim of an unstable ex, had been thoroughly dismantled. People remembered how he'd shown up uninvited to my party, how his accusations had crumbled under the weight of evidence, how the calm woman standing before them hadn't matched his descriptions at all. I didn't track his downfall closely. Once the party was over and the truth was out, I found I had very little interest in Derek's life. My focus had shifted entirely to my own future. The freelance design business I'd dreamed about for years finally started to take shape. I left the marketing agency and began building something of my own, something that reflected my actual vision rather than someone else's idea of what was practical or safe. Within 6 months, I had my first clients, small businesses looking for branding work. Within a year, I had more projects than I could handle alone and hired my first assistant. The relationships I'd neglected during my time with Derek slowly rebuilt themselves. Friendships that had faded found new life. Family connections that had grown distant became close again. I learned that the people who truly loved me had never stopped. They'd simply been waiting. And I learned something else too. The version of myself that Derek had tried to create, the small, accommodating, controllable woman who asked permission and apologized constantly, that was never who I really was. It was a costume I'd worn because I believed that's what love required. Real love, I discovered, didn't require me to shrink. Real love celebrated who I actually was. Standing in my new home office on the 1-year anniversary of that Sunday brunch, I thought about how differently everything had turned out than Derek had planned. He'd intended to break me publicly, to document my destruction, to use my pain to justify his choices. Instead, that moment in the restaurant had become the beginning of everything good that followed. The woman he tried to humiliate had become someone stronger than either of us expected. Derek never fully recovered from the exposure of his true character. The tech startup he worked for quietly let him go 6 months after the party during a restructuring. His professional network, once a source of pride, became a liability as the story of what he'd done continued to circulate. The last I heard, he'd moved to San Francisco, trying to start fresh somewhere no one knew his history. Meanwhile, his former friends faced their own reckonings. Scott's girlfriend left him after learning the full extent of his participation in the public humiliation scheme. Cameron lost several important business contacts who wanted nothing to do with someone who'd been complicit in such calculated cruelty. As I locked up my office that evening and stepped into the cool Seattle air, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been sitting in a restaurant watching the man I thought I loved announce to a room full of strangers that he didn't want me anymore. I'd felt every eye on me, felt the weight of expectation that I would crumble, felt the entire world waiting for me to fall apart. Instead, I'd thanked him for his honesty and walked away. That moment, which Derek had designed as my destruction, had become the first step toward my freedom. Looking back now, I realized I wouldn't have changed a single thing. The Freedom Party hadn't been about revenge at all. It had been about taking my life back and never apologizing for being exactly who I was meant to be. I don't know everything that happened between you and my brother, she continued. He's got his version, and I'm sure you have yours. But I wanted you to know that I never believed what he said about you. What did he say about me? There was a pause. That you were difficult. Emotional. That he was worried about how you'd react when he ended things. She took a breath. But Claire, I watched you at family events for 5 years. You were never any of those things. You were accommodating to the point of disappearing. I used to wonder why you never stood up for yourself. Her words hit something deep in my chest. I didn't stand up for myself because I thought that's what love looked like, I said quietly. I know, she said. And I'm sorry none of us said anything sooner. My mom's been asking questions this week, and I think she's starting to see things differently too. After we hung up, I sat with that conversation for a long time. Taylor's call was the first crack in Derek's carefully constructed wall. If his own sister was questioning his narrative, how many others would follow? The party venue looked stunning when I arrived Saturday afternoon for the final walkthrough. The Fairmont ballroom had been transformed from what would have been a traditional wedding reception into something vibrant and personal. Instead of the formal white and gold color scheme Derek had insisted on, I'd chosen deep burgundy, burnt orange, and touches of emerald green. String lights crisscrossed the ceiling, and the centerpieces featured dahlias and wild roses instead of the sterile white orchids Derek had selected. My mom found me standing in the middle of the room, taking it all in. How are you feeling? She asked. Free, I said. I feel free. The guests started arriving at 7. Amber was there first, followed by friends from college I hadn't seen in years, then a steady stream of faces I'd missed. Colleagues from my early days at the agency, cousins who'd always supported me but whom I'd kept at arm's length during my relationship with Derek. Each arrival felt like coming home. These were my people. The ones I'd pushed away or neglected because Derek had convinced me they didn't understand our relationship, that they were negative influences, that I needed to focus on building our life instead of maintaining individual connections. They'd come back anyway. By 8 o'clock, the room was full, and the energy was exactly what I'd hoped for. Warm, genuine, joyful. People were laughing and reconnecting and asking about my plans for the future. And then the questions started. So what really happened? My college roommate Emma asked, pulling me aside. The story Derek's been telling doesn't match the woman I see standing here. I took a breath and told her the truth. About the planned breakup, the prearranged witnesses, the recording, the affair with Vanessa that had been going on for months. I showed her the screenshots I'd saved, not displayed publicly, but available for anyone who asked. Her face went through several expressions as she absorbed the information. "That's sociopathic," she finally said. "He literally orchestrated your public humiliation." "He did," I agreed. "But he also miscalculated. He expected me to fall apart, and I didn't." Word spread through the party faster than I'd anticipated. By 9 o'clock, clusters of people were having intense conversations. Phones were being passed around showing screenshots, and the narrative was shifting in real time. I didn't have to do anything dramatic. I simply answered questions honestly when asked and let the evidence speak for itself. The turning point came when Bryce's wife, Jennifer, approached me. She'd been one of the women at that Sunday brunch, seated at the table with Derek's friends, watching everything unfold. "Claire," she said, her voice strained, "I owe you an apology." I waited. When Derek told us what he was planning, Bryce made it sound like an intervention. He said Derek needed to get out of an unhealthy relationship and that having friends there would support him. I didn't know about the recording. I didn't know about Vanessa. I thought we were helping a friend escape a bad situation. "And now?" I asked. "Now I feel sick," she admitted. "I was part of something cruel, and I didn't even realize it. The way you handled yourself that day, I kept thinking about it all week. You were so calm, so composed. That's not how someone acts if they're as unstable as Derek claimed." Jennifer wasn't the only one having revelations. Throughout the evening, I watched as the story Derek had carefully constructed